This is Slaughterhouse, a geometry rush level that pushed the boundaries of what is humanly possible. But today, we're going to erase it from existence, changing the game's history for better or for worse. But first, a little context. Slaughterhouse was created years ago by a creator named Icedcave. The level was never meant to be possible in the slightest, and stayed that way for a long time, till around mid-2021, when Icedcave decided to nerf the level down to a top 5 state, where it would be verified by a very talented player named Doggy. While Doggy was primarily known as a video editor at that time, they were casually one of the best players in the game for his time, having completed Tartarus, the Golden, Kinos, and plenty of other top levels. But things wouldn't go very smoothly for the seasoned veteran. Sometime after recording a promising run of 51%, Doggy chose to put the level on hold due to some recent drama on Twitter surrounding the level. Eventually, the level would be revamped and turned into a level that aimed to be the hardest thing ever beaten. In the process, Icedcave recruited multiple verifiers to race on the level, and the level would be verified by Space after only a week, taking them 42,000 attempts.
I can't fucking react, otherwise I'm gonna cough so much.
The level would be rated by Raptop, along with two other potential top 1 demons, being Firework and Arcturus. After Tartarus held the throne for over a year and a half, it was about to be bested multiple times simultaneously. Of the 3 levels, Slaughterhouse was considered to be the hardest and would go on to be placed at number 1, with Firework going at number 2, and Arcturus finding its spot at number 5, below Tartarus. The first obvious change with Slaughterhouse's erase of existence is that Firework would go on to be the level to dethrone Tartarus from the list, which would increase the level's popularity outright, and more fame for the level's verifier, being Trick, who would have the honor of being the Tartarus Slayer. Trick's trajectory of Slaughterhouse out of the mix changes drastically. The boost in popularity that he gained after verifying Firework would be amplified, potentially up to twice the boost in subscribers from the achievement. This, combined with his already impressive resume of completions, likely means that Trick would win Best Player of 2021, since after all, the awards are essentially a popularity contest, and his popularity in this hypothetical scenario would be through the roof. With this momentum, Trick enters 2022 as the best player in the game, pushing up towards the top of the stats viewer, looking to take the throne of the number 1 spot. But since Trick lacked the quantity of completions, he would fall short of the mark. At this time, the top spot was a 4-way race between Nswish, Space UK, RG, and Speartex, so it stands to reason that either RG or Speartex would take the number 1 spot. But who? In the real timeline, RG would take the number 1 spot, and I don't see that changing here. Unfortunately, Speartex lost motivation around a month before Slaughterhouse was verified, meaning RG would be alone at the top. But with no Slaughterhouse in this scenario, RG holds the position of the number 1 player for a longer period of time, giving them more time in the spotlight before Space UK took over the reins for good. Another quick thing to consider is that some levels wouldn't outright exist without Slaughterhouse. For example, we have Cosmos, a Cherry Team project that Trick would receive verification rights to. With the level taking heavy inspiration from Slaughterhouse's gameplay, it's very unlikely that the level would exist without Slaughterhouse to give it the kick into life. So as such, with Slaughterhouse's departure, Cosmos also never sees the light of day. Another level that ceases to exist without Slaughterhouse is the Rock House, which is always a direct copy of Slaughterhouse with an interesting song.
It's about drive, it's about power, we stay hungry, we devour, put in the work.
So that one is definitely off the table as well. Next players to talk about are the 2 players who had verification rights to Slaughterhouse, that being Doggy and Space UK. Let's start with Doggy. With no Slaughterhouse completion, Doggy likely flies under the radar as a player for a good while. He'll still hold a spot in the community as a highly respected editor, but the playing side of him won't see the full stage for a good while. Firework gave Doggy struggles, so it wouldn't surprise me that his next hardest would end up being Cupid Circles, or potentially an Arcturus completion months before his actual one. Doggy would still get his top 1 completion, but it would have come months behind schedule. Doggy's path stays somewhat on course, with his Acheron completion coming at around the same time as before, but the same can't be said for Space UK, who will have a completely different road ahead. While we know today that Space UK hacked the Slaughterhouse verification, we didn't know of it at the time, so as a result, Space UK would likely continue playing hard levels. With no Slaughterhouse, Space UK would likely complete Firework to get a top 1, and soon after, would complete Arcturus and Truefet to round out the top 10. But even with all of this, Space UK still flies under the radar, with no big verification to associate himself with. But there would be an opportunity that would open up. On April 7th, 2022, Acheron became an open verification, with anyone able to make progress towards verification. This would be Space UK's perfect opportunity to claim his verification and vault himself into popularity. You're probably wondering why I chose Acheron over Abyss of Darkness for his big verification. My reasoning is that Space UK would have an easier time with evading suspicion on Acheron, since Abyss of Darkness had lots of competitors who were top players, some of which spent weeks or even months building up progress. If Space UK were to interrupt this race and claim the level as fast as he claimed Slaughterhouse, the chances of him being cut would be much higher. Acheron doesn't have that problem, since nobody other than Wolves had been playing the level seriously. Space UK would claim a verification after around 2 weeks of playing, and would evade detection for the time being, resulting in Acheron being rated and placed at number 1 on the demon list. But hold on, before we go any further, we need to clarify. This hypothetical version of Acheron would likely be easier than the one rated today, as SpaceUK would likely be verifying the version that Wolves uploaded to the servers, so this version of Acheron won't be staying number 1 for a long time. As for when SpaceUK would be exposed in this timeline, I'd guess it would be slightly earlier, considering that Acheron was one of SpaceUK's more suspicious completions. But with SpaceUK completing Acheron 6 months ahead of schedule, I'll move up his exposal as a cheater by the same time, meaning SpaceUK is exposed as a cheater in October 2022 instead of April 2023. By that point, Acheron will have a new verifier. Whoever the first victor of Acheron after SpaceUK would claim the verification of Acheron, rather than Slaughterhouse. So who do I think the first victor of Acheron would be? After giving it some thought, the likely first victor would be Zoink. Given the similarities between this scenario and the real outcome, Zoink started his reign as the best player in GD by completing Slaughterhouse in April 22, which is right around the time that Acheron would be verified by SpaceUK in this hypothetical scenario. Instead of Zoink's rise coming off Slaughterhouse, it would likely come with Acheron, becoming the first victor, and would take on the rest of the top 10, and would compete with SpaceUK for being the best player of that time, until SpaceUK's exposal comes early in October, leaving Zoink as the undisputed top player, taking the reign of the number 1 spot on the stats viewer, and concluding 2022 with the title of Best Player in the 2022 awards. But this isn't the end of the story. Zoink still has one more verification that needs to be talked about. It's not the Cosmos update, we already covered that earlier, so what is the other level? It's none other than Avernus. Avernus would likely still follow the same path as it did in the present. It would definitely still exist, the only question is how hard would it be? This would be Zoink's first real verification, and would likely be buffed as a result, meaning the Avernus in this case would be around the same difficulty as the Avernus that we know of today. But where would it place? Well, as of today, the only level harder than Avernus is Acheron, but in this scenario, we're going off the Wolves version of Acheron, which is estimated to be right around Abyss of Darkness in difficulty. Whether or not Acheron would even be number 1 right now is a topic we'll get to, but the fact of the matter is that Avernus would likely be placed at number 1, since Avernus is quite a few places above Abyss of Darkness, so maybe it's a good thing that Slaughterhouse exists after all. Avernus may be the top 1 when the dust settles, but there are 2 more levels that could potentially vault into that role due to the absence of Slaughterhouse, and with the Wolves version of Acheron instead of Zoink's version. Let's talk about Silent Clubstep real quick. It would be verified at around the same time regardless of the fact that Slaughterhouse exists or not, but now a tricky case is presented with us. When Silent Clubstep was verified, the only levels apart from Slaughterhouse to compete at the top were Abyss of Darkness and Succubant Circles. At the time Silent Clubstep was originally placed on the demon list, it was placed below all of these levels, but over time, as more players experienced the level, it would be moved up above all of these levels, moving as high as number 3, but it was only number 3 because Avernus was placed at the same time, meaning it could have been second, only to Acheron, but since Acheron isn't as hard in this scenario, will Silent Clubstep hit the number 1 spot? Since we've already concluded that Avernus would likely be verified as a top 1, it would have likely been in verification for a longer period of time, as verification stress on a top 1 is something that makes playing the level a lot tougher mentally, from personal experience at least. So how much longer would it take for the top 1 Avernus to be verified, rated, and placed on the demon list? It could be any period of time, but to keep things simple, I'll go with 1 month, which might be a little long, but you have to remember that Abyss of Darkness went over a month without being rated, despite being a top 1, so the same thing could happen with Avernus. This means that Silent Clubstep likely moves up before Avernus is placed, instead of both changes happening at the same time, meaning Silent Clubstep goes from a robbed top 1 to a real top 1. Even though it wouldn't hold the title for very long, the community could once say that Silent Clubstep was the hardest level in Geometry Dash, but there's still one more level to talk about that could put all of that in jeopardy. Get ready, things are about to get crazy. Kyuki wouldn't at all be affected by Slaughterhouse's departure, and it would still contain the equally intense gameplay and extreme difficulty. When Kyuki was placed originally, it was so at number 3, with the only levels besting it being Acheron and Slaughterhouse, neither of which would be in that position. Kyuki was considered to be harder than Abyss of Darkness, with Demetrio having no other experience with top levels, that leaves Zoink's opinion of the level, who stated that it was harder than Abyss of Darkness, which in this would mean that it would also be harder than Acheron, which at this time would still be competing for the number 1 spot on the demon list. We already discussed that Silent Clubstep would be moved up later down the line, but we're still 4 months out from that, leaving Kyuki no other competitors for the top, meaning that Kyuki would have likely been placed at number 1 on the demon list, just barely edging out any other level for the throne, allowing for Demetrio, the creator and verifier of Kyuki, to reach a wider platform, and perhaps becoming an interesting prospect for a top player, being one of the few players representing Japan. Those are all the major events that would take place with Slaughterhouse erased from existence. In order to continue with our rewriting of history, let's take a look at the timeline of these events dating all the way back to Slaughterhouse's original verification. Starting all the way back in November 2021, Firework and Arcturus would find their ways onto the demon list. While Arcturus would fall short of expectations, Firework would be the level to knock Tartarus off the top spot after over a year and a half. starting a new era of the Demon List, and establishing Trick as one of the fastest growing players with its completion of Tartarus soon following. Interestingly enough, this would also mean that TrueFit would have reached the number 2 position on the Demon List, as shortly after Firework was placed, Tartarus and TrueFit would swap places. Coming in at the turn of 2022, we get the verification of Succubus Circles, which would happen at its normal time. The 2021 GD Awards would run around this time, and we've already established that Trick would win the category due to popularity after verifying Firework. Immediately after the ball drop, Succubus Circles is rated and immediately placed at number 1 on the Demon List, ending Firework's reign at the number 1 spot after only 2 months. This change would push Tartarus out of the top 3, and Sonic Wave Infinity out of the top 5. Diamond and Curse would gain a slight boost in popularity, as Succubus Circles would hold a longer rate at the number 1 spot, since it was originally shortened due to Slaughterhouse later swapping with the level. As such, Succubus Circles would stay at the number 1 spot for around 4 months. April 2022 would see the verification of 2 top 1 demons. On April 3rd, Curse would verify Abyss of Darkness on schedule, but would not receive an immediate rating from RobTop, leaving the door open for Space UK, who would verify Acheron in mid to late April. Now, there are 2 potential number 1 demons that are awaiting rates, so you're probably wondering which one would be rated first. And if you want my answer, I think we get a repeat of the rate wave back in October the year prior, with Abyss of Darkness and Acheron being rated at the same time, but which of the 2 would come out on top? It essentially comes down to which level gets beaten first, but with Space UK being a cheater, I would say that Space UK would claim to complete Abyss of Darkness before an Acheron victor emerges, and as a result, Acheron would be placed at number 1, with Abyss of Darkness slotting in at number 2 for the time being. Sometime in May or June is when I estimate Zoink's completion of Acheron taking place, becoming the first victor of the hardest demon, and with an Abyss of Darkness completion soon after. Zoink would likely pick Acheron over Abyss of Darkness in difficulty, as he considers AOD to be easier than Slaughterhouse in the present day. But when we move into July, that's where things start to become interesting again. There's one more player who enters the mix, that being Trick, who after completing Abyss of Darkness would go on to complete Acheron in much faster pace, becoming the second victor. Trick used to believe that Abyss of Darkness was harder than Zoink's version of Acheron, until his own experience with Acheron changed his mind. On the Wolves version of the level, Trick has a much easier time with it, and claims Abyss of Darkness to be harder. I know all these opinions together makes for a messy situation, so I'll make it simple. At this point, there are 4 opinions on the matter, 2 for Acheron, 2 for Abyss of Darkness. If the split is dead even, then it's very unlikely that the level will move unless something drastic happens. If a 5th opinion enters the mix, then there is a chance that the level may move as a result. Keep note of these opinions, they'll be important later on. Anyway, another key event that happened in July is Paco's verification of Silent Clubstep. After being advertised as a potential top 1, a quick completion for Zoink, and opinions from other reliable players would cause for Silent Clubstep to be placed all the way down at number 4, below even Succubus Circles, making for a top 5 consisting of Acheron, Abyss of Darkness, Succubus Circles, Silent Clubstep, and Firework. This is in fact the exact same order of the top 5 of Slaughterhouse, just insert it between Acheron and Abyss of Darkness, and you've got a perfect match. But after a rather uneventful August and September, October would bring total chaos to the Demon List. The first minor change is Silent Clubstep being moved above Succubus Circles, pushing it up to number 3. A little bit after this, everything goes to shit, with Space UK's exposal happening early. Not only does the community lose potentially its best player, it also loses any tranquility at the top of the Demon List. Remember this opinion sheet that was dead even? With Space UK ousted for cheating every achievement, he is removed from the discussion. Now Abyss of Darkness leads to the debate. Not too long after, Abyss of Darkness is swapped with Acheron, becoming the new number 1 demon. At this point, the best player title becomes a competition between Zoink, Trick, and Cursed. But with Zoink's rapid rise in 2022, he comes out in front, now with the Acheron verification in his possession. Fast forwarding to late November, Kyuki is verified by Demetrio, and rated shortly after. Zoink believes that Kyuki is harder than Abyss of Darkness today, so trusting his word, Kyuki is placed at the number 1 spot on the Demon List. Even with an eventual completion from Trick, who believes that Abyss of Darkness is harder, Kyuki stays at the number 1 spot, leaving us with this top 5. Perhaps the most interesting one we've seen yet. This top 5 would hold into 2023, and with the new year comes the new GD Awards, with Zoink as my pick for taking home best player this year. Kyuki enters 2023 as the hardest demon, and to make things even more crazy, Kyuki would hold the spot for several months, all the way until May 2023. It's around this time where I speculate Avernus would be verified, and would receive a rate, but it wouldn't be placed on the Demon List for a little while longer. In the meantime, we have a certain Silent Clubstep to talk about. Turns out, it's a lot harder than it was originally made out to be. 2 victors of the level, Doggy and Trick, both state that Silent Clubstep is harder than Slaughterhouse, but remember, Slaughterhouse doesn't exist in this video. Since Slaughterhouse and Acheron were the only levels Doggy can compare Silent Clubstep to, there's no real comparison for Kyuki. However, with Slaughterhouse above Kyuki on the list today, it's very likely that Doggy would have considered Silent Clubstep harder than Kyuki if they were to attempt it, assuming that opinion doesn't change. With that, Trick, a victor of both Kyuki and Silent Clubstep, believes Silent Clubstep to be harder, leaving Silent Clubstep in a 2-to-1 lead over Kyuki, pushing it to the number 1 spot on the Demon List. Almost a year after its original verification, and over 7 years since its original creation, Silent Collapse-Up is now officially the hardest level in Geometry Dash. Too bad it would hold that title for at most a few weeks, as Avernus would be placed at number 1 shortly after, much to the dismay of the top players. And that's where the list changes stop, with the top 10 looking like this, a completely different look from what the list looks like today. Nearly everything would be shuffled around, making for quite an interesting turn of events.